Hi folks, welcome to my channel. I'm Barın, and besides my day job as a university professor and administrator, I work as a political analyst and historian of international affairs. Today, I'll be discussing the May 14th elections in Turkey, and my initial thoughts on them. A man walks into a bar and says, Turkish elections, no, I'm not going to throw a punchline because the elections in my country are no joke. Quite the opposite. What I'll be discussing here will probably affect your life, whether you're Turkish or not. So let's dive right in. Before we start, please click the like and subscribe buttons and leave a comment below. It really helps to grow my channel. Thought number one, reports of President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan's political demise were exaggerated. Erdogan, in power as Prime Minister and President since 2003, was expected to lose on May 14th and lose badly. Even the most cautious and pro-Erdogan pollsters said that he would not win in the first round, unlike past contests. But Erdogan still came close to victory by pulling 49.5% of the popular vote and forcing his opponent into a runoff election. Even more impressive, Erdogan's party, the AKP, along with his electoral allies, secured a majority in parliament, even though the AKP's seats in parliament fell to their lowest number since 2002. How did that happen? And why was it such a surprise that Erdogan could pull this off? A big part of the reason is that the Turkish president has turned increasingly authoritarian in recent years. While Erdogan's first years in power marked improvements in democratic standards and the rule of law, as well as high levels of economic growth, Turkey has been suffering under a slow-motion train wreck of an economy since 2018. Inflation is off the roof, unemployment is high, youth unemployment is the worst it has ever been, and the Turkish lira is but a fraction of its worth against every important international currency compared to 10 years ago. Erdogan's solution? Fire one finance minister and economy minister after another. If that fails, fire the governors of the Turkish Central Bank as well. Try anything except for commonsensical policies that worked in the past, including under Erdogan. On top of all that came the botched response to the devastating twin earthquakes of February 6th, which further proved that Erdogan's presidential system of government does not solve problems quickly. Far from it. Problems are worsened under this one-man rule. Therefore, many opinion polls in the run-up to the May 14th elections showed Erdogan trailing behind his main opponent, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, the leader of the center-left CHP and the joint candidate of the Nations Alliance, a six-party coalition that included nationalists and Erdogan's former Islamist allies. By and large, Erdogan ran a campaign of fear and division, while his allies tacitly warned the electorate that their defeat could foster violence. One of the parties in the Erdogan camp, Hüdapar, made no secret that they see women as property. Charming. Kılıçdaroğlu, in contrast, played to his strengths. He ran an inclusive, pluralistic, and positive campaign. He talked about the future that he and his allies would build to benefit both present and future generations. Kılıçdaroğlu hit all the right notes and reminded a lot of people of Barack Obama's famous 2008 presidential campaign in the United States. Kılıçdaroğlu said the Turkish economy is no longer generating wealth for the masses, so he pledged to change that with concrete action plans. He also pointed out that young people are taken to court for insulting President Erdogan, so Kılıçdaroğlu promised that he would have the law changed and that he would not press charges for being insulted as president. Another important part of Kılıçdaroğlu's platform was pointing out that Turkey is going to be one of the worst affected countries by climate change. So he specifically discussed building a new infrastructure that would be resilient against extreme weather and natural disasters. So the choices facing the Turkish electorate were, on the one hand, fear and not at all tacit threats of violence, and on the other hand, democracy, freedom of expression, rule of law, and wealth. Sounds like a no-brainer, right? Not quite. For one, Erdogan is a consummate political and administrative operator. He demands results and loyalty from his subordinates, and he does not mind sacking them even when he gets results and loyalty. In addition, before the elections, Erdogan made sure that the coffers of state were at the disposal of his campaign. So he could roll out prestige defense and infrastructure projects to amp up his supporters' excitement and patriotic pride. The Turkish commander-in-chief even changed his profile picture on photo to one that exudes a more manly and soldierly image. And while doing all that, Erdogan used the mass media, public as well as private media outlets, like his own campaign promo team. Kılıçdaroğlu, on the other hand, because of his kind and calm aura, was seen as unlikely to win from the get-go. After all, his critics claimed, he had not won a single election since he became CHP chairman in 2010. Even though that was not really true, Kılıçdaroğlu was one of the architects of Erdogan's first defeat in June 2015 and the chief architect of the 2019 local election victories for the opposition. Still, many people thought that, he's a loser, he's not going to make it. So in early March, Meral Akşener, a leading nationalist member of the Nations Alliance, briefly walked away from the table for fear that if Kılıçdaroğlu becomes the candidate, he might not attract enough votes and Erdogan might win again. The solution to convince Akşener? Stacking the prospective Kılıçdaroğlu cabinet with Nations Alliance leaders as vice presidents, along with the popular mayors of Istanbul and Ankara. In fact, said mayors would have been Akşener's favorite for presidential candidate. For Erdogan, however, who stands tall on his one-man image, all that decision-making plans would spell disaster and chaos for the country, and he clearly stated that. He used it very effectively against the opposition. But more than that, the tacit support for Kılıçdaroğlu from the Kurdish party, HDP, which is often seen as the political wing of the militant organization PKK, helped Erdogan to paint the opposition in cahoots with terrorists. Even though Erdogan's own allies, Hüdapar, had members who had terrorized and brutally murdered hundreds of civilians in the late 1990s and early 2000s. Thought number two. Kılıçdaroğlu and the opposition are bloodied, but they still have a solid chance to win. Now, the numbers don't look good for Kılıçdaroğlu and the opposition, and the runoff on May 28th is still for Erdogan to lose. After all, he has to win another half points from the electorate. So the trick for Kılıçdaroğlu would be to convince the spoiler third-party candidate, Sinan Oğan, to get his voters to cast their ballots for the opposition. Oğan, a tall, smart, and handsome nationalist academic, tallied 5.3% of the votes in the first round. And he has put forth several non-negotiable points before he is ready to endorse Kılıçdaroğlu. These were a pledge from Kılıçdaroğlu and the opposition that the first four articles of the Turkish constitution will not be changed, along with Article 66 that defines every citizen of the Republic of Turkey as Turkish, irrespective of their ethno-linguistic, racial, or religious background. Another one of Oğan's pledge requests from Kılıçdaroğlu is that he has to cease cooperating with the HDP. Oğan also wants Kılıçdaroğlu to explicitly pledge to send back the millions of Syrian and Afghan asylum seekers to their countries, which is something Kılıçdaroğlu has already done. And while this fourth item has not really come up, we can expect that Oğan will ask Kılıçdaroğlu to abolish the AKP's questionable buy property for citizenship program for people with dubious connections to Turkey, but who deposit money into Turkish banks or buy homes or start businesses in Turkey and quickly become Turkish citizens. To be sure, some of these items will be bitter pills to swallow, and they may even cost Kılıçdaroğlu his support from the HDP and Kurdish voters. But Kılıçdaroğlu has already brought to his side Meral Akşener, a former party mate of Erdogan. At any rate, Kılıçdaroğlu has spoken on many of the above issues in a way that would be acceptable to Erdogan, but not necessarily offend Kurdish citizens and the HDP base. That brings us to thought number 3. No matter who wins, the future will not be easy for Turkish democracy. Now, Turks of all walks of life and international observers are worried about what the future might hold. After all, Turkey is a country sitting at the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and Africa, and it is directly involved in some of the world's most salient geopolitical, social, and economic matters. What happens there affects a lot of us and a lot of you. The one good news in all of this is that turnout rates on the May 14th elections were high. They were close to 90%, 9-0, yes. Because other elements of a functional democracy are weak in Turkey, the rule of law, the court system, human rights, and freedom of expression, the ballot box is sacrosanct for Turkish voters. So it's actually good that my compatriots still have faith in that aspect of political democracy. Nonetheless, there are some worrisome trends ahead. I would like to note 3 of them in particular. 1, while many citizens are fed up with Erdogan's brand of political Islam, compared to some of his allies such as Hüdapar and the New Welfare Party, even his most vicious detractors might miss the Turkish strongman when he retires this year or in 2028. Both Hüdapar and New Welfare are taking extreme positions against women and LGBTQ people. And while Hüdapar and New Welfare are still a very small minority in Erdogan's coalition, and the Turkish president, it must be said, has gotten rid of much more powerful allies than them in the past, these groups' entry into the Turkish parliament will give them a pulpit from which they could spread their vitriol. Second, this brand of radical political Islam I just mentioned is likely to find itself at loggerheads with a much more radical and acerbic secular Turkish nationalism, one that will also likely to be much less tolerant. So when you also add the Kurds into that picture, a three-way clash on the very basic tenets of what makes the country's political system could really start undermining Turkish democracy and lead to political violence not seen since the 1970s. The final worrisome trend, and I haven't really seen enough of this to be convinced that it happened, the vote count on May 14, some people claim was rigged, or at least part of it. And there are indeed disturbing news coming from the opposition side that there are discrepancies between the ballot count and the data input. However, this affects only 4,000 ballot boxes out of nearly 200,000 ballot boxes that were used for the vote. And that's not enough to change the results. But that's not even really the point because, while the AKP or the opposition may claim that there's electoral fraud or they could even fabricate claims of electoral fraud, the more worrisome part is that this sort of a gossip mill could create a post-truth environment of the sort found in the United States. And when coupled with other worrisome trends that I just discussed, that could prove to be another toxic cocktail for Turkish democracy. So that's my take on the May 14th elections in Turkey. What do you think? Who will win the runoff on May 28th? Erdogan or Kılıçdaroğlu? Is there cause for optimism in any of this? Or is my pessimism actually warranted? Please leave your thoughts in the comments below and click the like and subscribe buttons so I can continue to make more videos like this one. Thanks for watching, friends. I'll see you soon.